When people think back to the Pendulum era, they probably think of how the mechanic warped the game around certain exceptionally powerful decks, like Performapals or Pendulum Magicians. What people don't seem to remember is the start of the Pendulum era, where the mechanic was lackluster at best. And if you like this sort of content, be sure to subscribe, it helps the new channel. Let me know what you guys want to see next, I would love to talk about it, and also I just want some support for the new content. Thank you so much. The first Pendulum cards might as well have been scales with no effects. Time Gazer and Stargazer Magician. Scale 1 and 8, they made every single Yu-Gi-Oh player cry out that the game would be overly swingy, pun intended, and that you'd be able to vomit every monster in the game out to your board in an instant. All of this outcry led to the best deck to use Pendulums, Scraps. Yes, Scraps had a place in the metagame, and yes, it was purely due to the fact that Scrap Factory came out in the last Zexal era set, and Pendulums just allowed you to do everything you wanted to do. Being able to throw out a Golem and all your other monsters, combined with the newly released Supply Squad, led to a lot of card advantage and synchro plays the deck never had access to. Was it good? Kind of. But it still wasn't enough to combat the current meta of Fire Fists and Boojins and Mermails and the like. But it was a use of Pendulums that wasn't forced or badly implemented. It tried to do what it could. This led to the idea that Pendulums could be used to revive old and struggling decks, at least until their own archetype came out that was made to push the mechanic. This still was not the case. The first set of the Pendulum era, while being incredibly powerful and introducing new archetypes into the game that focused on fusion, synchro, Xyz, and even an attempt at a tribute summoning based deck, didn't do much for the Pendulum mechanic. The meta settled, old deck players eventually conceded to the power of Dante and Construct, and Pendulums were left in the dust. That is, until the exact next set, where the Klee made an appearance. The first real dedicated Pendulum archetype, Klee made a splash on the scene by searching anything with Scout, and then spamming out a bunch of monsters only to hit the entire field with Skill Drain. The deck was more focused on using Pendulum summoning, but not doing very much with the Pendulum effects. They were more glorified field spells than anything, and this was before the player base found that the best way to play Klee was to just sit on towers, the card that the idea of a towers card even came from. Unaffected by everything, it was the boss monster, and led Klees to just focus on spamming it out as much and as quickly as possible, relegating Pendulums to simply help you get there more than anything else or anything creative. To top it all off, they were very exclusive, stating that if you use them as scales, you can't summon anything but Klees, making it so even extra deck cards like the rank 4 toolbox of yesteryear was completely invalid to them. Klee felt like a completely different game from the rest of the meta up to this point, left in a corner. Great, but still very distant. The idea of Pendulums resurrecting old decks was gone by this point. The meta shifted around, but the Duelist Alliance set still reigned supreme for years to come. The next big Pendulum archetype to come out, Magispectors, were thought to be the end of Yu-Gi-Oh! When they came out. They can search and negate anything, people said. But the issue is that Nekroz could do that anyway, and it was a Pendulum deck that not only had very restrictive scales, but also didn't have any Pendulum effects whatsoever, leaving them to be known as the deck that had Kieran in it, one of the best Pendulum cards ever made. Other Pendulum archetypes came and went, Amorphages being the best example of a deck that saw zero play, but tried something new with its design philosophy. But it took a whole set to get an actual Pendulum archetype, and it took many more after to get a Pendulum deck that was good and used the Pendulum scales as extensions of the card, and not just a number you can summon between. When you look at the difference between Pendulum Magicians and Klee, for example, the difference is striking, or even Endymion. I know this card has a lot of text, but that means it at least has effects that aren't just search, or in Magispector's case, literally nothing. At least Time Gazer and Stargazer Magician had some kind of effect. It didn't really matter, but they had some kind of effect, at least. But that just can't be the case for a lot of Pendulums, and it wasn't until way later. So, while Pendulums were still a great mechanic, one of the most overpowered mechanics the game had ever seen up to that point, it took a long while to get there. If you like this video, go ahead and check out this one right here about the same format we're discussing right now. It's about Snatch Steal. It came back for only a single format.